Are you looking to start a career in sales, or are you an established salesperson who's about to interview for your next sales role? Well, stick with me throughout this episode as I discuss the make or break skills you'll need to show that you've mastered in your next sales interview. You've got to just learn how to interview. Sales and business development professionals drive revenue and can be the difference between the success or failure of a given company, division, or business unit. And since the beginning of time, great sales professionals have mastered a set of behaviors that separate those who close from those who lose. However, in the post-pandemic world, many so-called sales professionals want to take shortcuts. They want a career in sales, but they don't feel the need to master these skills. Some even go so far as to turn down interviews once they realize they'll have to do things like give a sales presentation. Others don't even bother to close at the end of an interview, but wonder why they didn't get the job. Salespeople are some of the highest paid individuals in the world, and those who make it to the highest levels of sales often go on to become presidents and CEOs of companies and end up making 7, even 8 figures. That's right, millions. Are you looking to start a career in sales, or are you an established salesperson who's about to interview for your next sales role? Well, stick with me throughout this episode as I discuss the make or break skills you'll need to show that you've mastered in your next sales interview. My name is Mark Williamson, and I'm the head of talent acquisition for a leading U.S. company. In this episode, I'll share 5 critical sales competencies that companies are looking to evaluate in a typical sales interview, along with some example behavioral interview questions that companies will likely ask you to evaluate those competencies. And as I share those questions, I'll also give some insight into exactly what the interviewer is evaluating with said questions. So let's get into it. The first sales competency that companies typically look to evaluate is consultative selling skills. So some typical interview questions that you might hear when a company's looking to evaluate your consultative selling skills include questions such as the following. First up, tell me about a time when you've uncovered a customer need through consultative selling. Now, what is the company really asking here, right? First of all, we all know that consultative selling means you're not just going in with a pushy sales approach and trying to force a product or a service on a customer. Rather, your approach to the customer is to ask lots of open-ended questions, get to know that customer, and through interacting and asking good questions, figure out if you can uncover a need that either the customer, him or herself, or the company has that you might be able to fulfill with your product or service. This question requires you during the interview to literally give an example of a scenario where you interacted with a customer, what sort of questions you asked, what sort of needs you uncovered, and then share what product or service you were able to sell to them either on the spot or over time. So be prepared to answer that question. Another question in the consultative selling skills evaluation process could be, tell me about a time in the recent past when you had to overcome a customer objection in order to make a sale. And again, Sales 101 teaches us that overcoming objections is going to be one of the core skill sets that you've got to have as a successful salesperson. And so what do we mean by that? That means if a customer objects to a price, or if a customer says, maybe there's a quality issue about your product, or maybe they have another set of products or services they're used to using, and so their objection is they already have a product or service. How are you able to overcome that objection? What product features and benefits were you able to highlight? Or what scenario could you solve that's a little bit different than what they're already working with? So Be prepared to answer a question such as that. The third question in the consultative selling skills category could be, tell me about a recent presentation you prepared that aided you in convincing a prospect to purchase your product or service. What format was the presentation in? How long did it take you to prepare it? And how did the presentation go? Now, this question is really exactly what it sounds like. It's asking you, are you comfortable preparing presentations that aid you in selling? Formal presentations. And you might be surprised that there are a lot of people out there who do not prepare presentations as part of their sales process. And so they'll get stumped in an interview when this particular question is asked. And so essentially what a company is trying to get at here is, are you comfortable using PowerPoint? You know, in today's world, PowerPoint is the primary tool that people use for presentations. Now, if you've got another solution, another software solution you use to prepare presentations, that's fine. But you need to be prepared to give an example of the types of presentations you prepare. As the question said, what format was it in? How long did it take you to prepare it? And how did the presentation go? So if you're a true sales professional who's been out there selling for a while, you should have examples of this. And if you're a new salesperson, then you should have done this in college or in the military or whatever your world consisted of. You should be able to give examples of when you've had to prepare presentations that you could then translate into a sales presentation if you ever needed to. The fourth question that a company might ask you around consultative selling skills is, tell me about a time when you've changed your sales approach or your product or service recommendation after listening to a customer idea or concern. And what that question is really getting at is, maybe you went into a sales process with a certain approach in mind, and then the customer threw you for a curve or threw a wrench in the process and told you something that you didn't even know about. And so maybe you quickly realize, you know what, the solution or service you were going to offer is not the right one. So this is really asking you to think of an example of where you had to adjust on the fly. Or maybe you even had to say to the customer, you know what, after hearing what you've shared with me today, I'd like to go back and pull some things together so that I can better meet your needs with a product, solution, or a service. So, you know, be ready to give that sort of example. And then the fifth and final question you might hear in the consultative selling skills evaluation process is, tell me about a time when you were successful in upselling a product or service to a customer. And it doesn't matter whether or not you're in an inside sales position, a customer service position, or a true territory sales role where you're a hunter-gatherer, or whether you're an account management role, there's always an expectation that you're going to upsell if given the opportunity. Again, it requires you to listen to the customer's need. And if you hear something, whether it be something you can upsell or whether it's a partner that you work closely with in your organization, maybe you hear that there's another solution that someone else on a different team has, but you upsold that customer into something different than what they already have. It doesn't mean they stop using what they already have, but maybe you've upsold them into something else or a higher tier of what they already had. So be ready for that. And again, you know, what those questions that I just named for you were essentially looking to evaluate, right, were the following: whether or not you have the ability to understand and identify clients' needs and show the value of your product or service. 2, whether you have the ability to effectively communicate with customers, both verbally and through sales presentations. 3, whether you could demonstrate persistence when it comes to removing obstacles in pursuit of sales success. And 4, whether you have the ability to manage the full sales cycle and ultimately close business. The second competency that companies are typically looking to evaluate is relationship management. And some typical behavioral interview questions you might hear in the relationship management category include questions like, tell me about a time when you had to get past a gatekeeper in order to speak to a decision maker. And again, this goes back to Sales 101. Every salesperson worth their salt knows that there's going to come a time, and often many times, where you have to get past someone who's not the ultimate decision maker. Whether that be a secretary, a front desk person, an executive assistant, or an individual contributor or manager who's in the organization belonging to the person you ultimately want to sell to. Maybe they're blocking you from getting there. Maybe that particular vice president has told his or her executive assistant, do not send people my way, but you've got to figure out a way to get past that gatekeeper. So that's a question that's asking you to give an example of when you've done that. What have you done? Have you brought donuts? Have you brought coffee? Have you taken a person out to lunch? Or did you, just build a rapport hanging out at the front desk, even though they wouldn't let you get to the back to speak to the person? Or was it email correspondence that you finally broke down the barriers? Just be ready to answer that question. The second question in the relationship management category that you might face is, give me an example of when you've maintained a client relationship with a key decision maker when there were no current sales opportunities. They might even ask you to share an example of when a relationship you nurtured, such as this one, turned into a sales opportunity. So again, what are they asking you here? Essentially what this is saying is there come times over the course of your relationship with customers where there may not be anything new to sell. Maybe they've already bought your product or service. You've got them on a 2-year contract or whatever the case may be. And maybe there's just nothing new to sell at the moment. And so maybe you've had 3, 4, 5 months, 6 months with nothing new there. So the interviewer is looking for you to give an example of a time where you were able to maintain the client relationship, even though there were no opportunities to sell them something. So that can include things like you checked in on a monthly basis with them via email, or you went by once a month to visit that person in the office, or you took them to lunch, or you had made note of their birthdays or their kids' birthdays or whatever the case might be. And whenever those dates came around, you reached out or you sent a Starbucks card or whatever the case may be within the rules of what you're able to do in sales, right? You've got to be ready and armed with examples of multiple relationships like this that you've been able to maintain. And then give an example of how a relationship like that you nurtured finally turned into a sales opportunity. So again, be prepared with examples. A third question you might get in the relationship management category would be something like, tell me about a time when one of your key allies left the company and you had to win over their replacement or the new decision maker in order to keep the customer as a client. What challenges did you face? Now, again, this question's pretty self-explanatory, but this is essentially saying the person you sold a product or service to all of a sudden either decided to leave and go off to a new company, or they got fired, or they retired, or whatever the case may be. And someone new came in. And so now that warm and fuzzy relationship you had no longer exists. What did you do? How did you build a new relationship with the new person? What strategy and tactic did you take in order to do so? And again, this happens quite often, so you should have a few examples of this. And again, if you're a new salesperson, you may not get this question if you're coming straight out of college or something, but over time, this is a question you're going to have to be able to handle. I hope you're finding value in this episode, but I know most of you are here because you have an upcoming job interview in the coming days or weeks. Heck, some of you might even have a job interview tomorrow. Or whatever the case may be, I wanted to take a brief moment to let you know about a resource I've put together for those of you wanting to put some time and focus into ensuring that you're fully prepared for that upcoming interview. As many of you know, successfully landing a job, especially a high-paying one, is not just about interviewing. Rather, it's the culmination of several key activities throughout the interview process. So I've created an all-encompassing but highly digestible interview training course to teach you the 10 things you can do to ensure that you make the right moves throughout the interview process so you can stand out from the competition and land the job. Whether you've got 2 full weeks or less than 24 hours to prepare for your next interview, my interview training course will teach you the 3 essential components of interview prep: how to answer the 25 most frequently asked interview questions, 10 questions designed to weed out unprepared job candidates, how to frame your interview answers for maximum impact, how to think on your feet during an interview when you're asked a question you're not prepared for, the proper way to follow up after the interview so that you can remain memorable in a sea of job candidates, plus several additional game-changing tactics to ensure that you beat out the competition and land that next job. The course is downloadable, so that means you can have access to it within seconds, and you can complete the training course in less than 1 hour. But trust me when I tell you, you'll be armed with insider interviewing strategies that will last you a lifetime. Details for how to get your copy of Prepare for the Job Interview in 24 hours or less can be found in the description or show notes below. Now back to the episode. The third critical sales competency that companies are looking to evaluate is your short and long-term strategic planning / pipeline management ability. Okay? So again, short and long-term strategic planning and pipeline management ability. Some typical behavioral interview questions you might hear to evaluate this competency includes things like, give me an example of a time when you researched the market, the current business climate, and competitor data to create a strategic plan for your assigned territory. They might ask you to walk them through your process, detailing the tools you use to conduct your research, as well as what the final plan included. They might also ask, how did you use this plan in your daily sales activities? Now, all that was a lot of words to say. You will be asked to describe how you develop your territory sales plan, or how you develop your annual sales plan, or your biannual sales plan. Salespeople need to have a plan, almost like a business plan. Most companies require salespeople to put together a sales plan that lays out how you're going to go about your business throughout that period, whether it's a half a year or a year. What territory are you covering? What are those locations? What are those particular facilities, hospitals, doctors, whatever your client might be, warehouses, which ones are you going to target and why? What do you think the market is for those particular prospects? On and on and on. There are blueprints for creating these sales plans, but you cannot go into a sales interview not understanding that, not having done that, not knowing at least that you need to do that. And they're going to ask you, what tools did you use to do the research? How did you find out about the competitor data? What made you choose the particular clients you're going to go after and the prospects you're going to pursue? So be ready with how you develop your sales plan. Second behavioral interview question you might hear under this pipeline management and short and long-term strategic planning category is, tell me about a time when your normal prospecting method was not successful and you used a creative prospecting technique to build a sales pipeline. I think that one's pretty self-explanatory. For example, if your normal prospecting technique is getting a list, maybe you purchase an industry list of potential buyers of your product or service, and you do that every year, and maybe all of a sudden the organization who produces those lists went out of business, and so those lists aren't available anymore. So maybe you can give an example of Okay, when that happened, what did you do? Did you shift over to use LinkedIn Sales Navigator? Did you, use another service that's out there that can give you names and phone numbers and email addresses of people? Um, you know, Whatever it might be, you need to be ready and prepared to talk about how you used an alternate method to prospect and build a sales pipeline. The third question you might hear: walk me through a typical workday from the time you get up in the morning until you wrap up your work in the evening. The interviewer will be assessing what a day of prospecting, cold calling, account management, and admin looks like for you. Again, for this one, you better be an early riser. You should have a routine in the morning. You should have a routine in the evening, how you check your calendar and make sure you've got the right appointments there and you know what's in store for the day. Do you answer emails in the morning? Do you get up first thing? Do you work out? Do you eat breakfast? Don't leave anything out here if asked this question. They want to know, like they said, from the time you wake up to the time you shut it down in the evening, what do you do? Like I said, I get up at 6 a.m. I go to the gym and I work out for an hour. Then I come back and I shower. Then I make breakfast. And then I go to my computer and I check my email and make sure that there's nothing that came in overnight. Or then I look at my appointments that I already looked at the previous day, but just to confirm I know what I'm doing for the day. And then I start my day and then walk them through the types of things you do throughout the day. Is it cold calling? Is it prospecting in another way? Is it territory management by visiting clients? Is it travel? Whatever it might be, you need to be able to share and paint a vivid picture of what a typical workday would look like for you. And then the fourth and final question you might hear in this category is something like, which CRM systems are you familiar with? And how do you use a CRM to help you manage your territory? So again, most companies these days will have Salesforce.com as their CRM, Microsoft Dynamics potentially. Some companies use HubSpot. And there's plenty of others out there that are considered CRM or customer relationship management tools. So you need to be able to speak to the one or two that you're familiar with and how you use it. Again, if you're intimately familiar with CRM systems, you can put notes in those systems. You can set appointments in those systems. You can have pipeline value amongst a whole host of other things. You can run reports. There's customizations that you can make inside the CRM, potentially, depending on how your company runs things, that allow you to look at things in certain ways and chop up data. So be prepared to talk about your comfortability with CRM systems. The fourth core competency that a lot of companies look to evaluate when it comes to salespeople is influencing others and collaborative problem solving. Now, some of the behavioral interview questions you might face in this category include things like, describe a time when a client was skeptical and you had to convince them that your product or service could be of value to them. So again, the category is influencing others and collaborative problem solving. So this is when a client was skeptical, which also could be sort of an objection, but they're skeptical of something that you've said you could offer, and then you had to convince them that your service could be of value to them. That might mean pulling in some reinforcements from the sales team who could, demonstrate the technical aspects of the product a little better than you could. Or it could be as simple as helping them see things in a little different way, to see that, the benefits and the features and benefits that you've been describing are truly valid, and maybe they didn't quite understand them, but you're going to need to be able to give examples of when you've been able to do that. The second question you might hear in this category is, share a situation where you had to influence a manager or a team member to see things your way. And this is probably more of an internal scenario, not necessarily when you had to influence a prospect or a customer, but maybe your manager or a team member who might have been asking you to do something a certain way or didn't believe in something you were trying to utilize in the sales process, and you had to convince them and show them why, whether that be through a presentation or just through some deeper conversation. But you need to be able to share that example. The third question could be, describe a time when you needed information and contributions from other people within your company in order to aid in the pursuit of a sale. Now, again, this is another question that's centered around sort of teaming and relying on others who have knowledge and expertise that you may not have within your own organization. The fifth and final core competency that you're going to need to be able to speak to in an interview is centered around business and financial acumen. Some behavioral interview questions you might face in this category are things like, when you need to learn about a new prospect or a client, what business information resources do you use? Right? This is really getting to the heart of, do you read the Wall Street Journal? Do you use Reuters? Is there another tool or service, TechCrunch or something else that, are there publications that you utilize, or newspaper articles that you read, or white papers, or whatever the case may be, to learn about a new prospect or a client or business that you're trying to get into? The second question you might hear is, tell me about a time when a market or business event influenced how you approached a potential customer. Again, maybe we're in a recession, or maybe we came out of a recession, or maybe we were in a pandemic. Talk about how that event influenced how you approached a potential customer. A third question you might face could be something like, tell me about a time during the sales process when you had to convince a finance leader that investing in your product or service made sense for their company. And so again, this is a question where maybe your primary prospect said, you know what, I've got to get someone from finance involved here because, we've got some cost pressures, or we've been asked to watch our spending. And you're going to have to convince the finance leader that this product or service makes sense and can fit into the budget, or however you can, maybe you've got some creative billing that will allow them to spread things out over time. This is where you're going to have to convince that finance leader, though, that they can make this work. A fourth question you could face could be something like, how do you stay up to date on industry trends? And how do you use those trends to aid in your client pursuit? Again, similar to the first question I mentioned, where I was talking about, if you need to learn about a new prospect or a client, what business information resources do you use? This is a question that's similar to that. What publications or resources do you use to stay on top of the industry, to know what the latest and greatest is? I mean, it doesn't have to always be a fancy resource either, right? It could be something as simple as Google News alerts, right? Because most of us are aware that you can tell Google to send you alerts on certain topics. And if you're a pharmaceutical sales rep, or if you're a medical device sales rep, or if you're a packaging sales rep, you could set up things inside the system to send you alerts when things happen within your industry, with companies that you're interested in, or the industry at large. So to recap the 5 sales competencies that you need to master if you really want to go in and slay that next interview, they are consultative selling skills, relationship management, short and long-term strategic planning / pipeline management, influencing others / collaborative problem solving, and business and financial acumen. As the head of recruiting, who on a day-to-day basis, my team hires salespeople, professional level salespeople. We hire both inside salespeople as well as your traditional outside salespeople, both hunter-gatherers as well as account managers. We see it all the time. We get a ton of people applying for positions or agencies submitting us people for consideration for positions. But when we interview those people, they are missing the ability to articulate a grasp of consultative selling, relationship management, pipeline management, influencing others in collaboration, and business and financial acumen. So if you're out there and you are a wannabe salesperson, or if you're a salesperson already but looking to elevate to the next level of sales professional, you need to master those key areas. And it's not hard to do, but you simply have to practice, prepare, delivering answers to how you operate in those particular competencies and how you have grasped those competencies and put them to use on a day in, day out basis. I help frustrated job seekers successfully navigate the job search and interview process.